For more than 2 decades, we've been educating our listeners about financial topics that are most important to you. Do you have enough money to retire? How will you keep from running out of money? What's your plan for managing market risk? What about taxes, inflation, and healthcare? Each week, we talk with an advisor at Lucia Capital Group about these issues and more. This is Managing Your Financial Future.
And welcome back to the podcast. This is Managing Your Financial Future. Thank you very much. Another episode underway. I'm going to start off today with a line from one of my favorite books, Morgan Housel, one of my favorite authors, as you probably know. He wrote a book called The Psychology of Money. And this quote, I think, fits the topic for today perfectly. And I think I've said this on the show before. The quote is, "The most important part of every plan is to plan on the plan, not going according to plan." Rick, have you heard that before?
Very much, yes. And it's it's very true. The best laid plan goes to heck when the shooting starts. I mean, it's all, once you get into it, there's so many outside factors that can change what's going on. And so you plan for the worst. Obviously, you pray for the best, but you plan for the worst and hope that you don't find anything worse than what you thought about.
Well, and and I love that phrase because it applies to so many things in life, and not just finances. Okay, it's why airplanes and flight plans have dozens of contingencies built in. Okay, it's why schematics are drawn up before a football or basketball game, just in case your opponent doesn't do what you thought they'd do, which happens all the time. But for whatever reason, people don't always build their retirement plans with the same idea in mind that something could go wrong. And Rick, I think anybody could just plug numbers into a computer, assume age.
I think that's partially why the systematic withdrawal approach is so appealing to so many advisors, and the simplicity of it appeals to so many retirees that it sounds reasonable. And if you don't know any better, it sounds like this makes a lot of sense. And from an advisor standpoint, I can set a computer up to do all my work for me, and I can go golf or whatever it is that I feel I want to do, and be done by noon and have the rest of the day off. And so, but the problem is, once you scratch the surface and you look, okay, but what could go wrong? Okay, this works great if we use averages, not actual returns or downturns. We just use averages. If we look at all the wonderful things that happen in the best of times, hey, this plan works really well, but what happens if? What happens with Mr. Murphy comes along and says, "I'm going to lay down my law"? We all know Murphy's law, and it affects some people more than others. And
You just hit it. You just hit it right there, okay? Because a plan can work great. It might if the assumptions work and they're all right, but what if they're not? What if the assumptions are only mostly right, or something happens you never thought to plan for in the first place? And those are the two most important words your financial plan should address. What if? Those are the two. And this is the idea for today, okay? We're going to do a little bit of, I don't know, it's not a retirement stress test, but maybe it is, because a good plan ought to have some, we've said this before, room for error. It's almost guaranteed that the next big bad thing that will happen to your portfolio, the retirement plan, the economy, whatever, will be something you never saw coming. And to quote Morgan Housel one last time here, he said, a plan is only useful if it can survive reality. And a future filled with unknowns is everyone's reality. A good plan doesn't pretend this weren't true. It embraces it and emphasizes room for error. And so with that in mind, Rick, we're going to look at 3 things that could potentially break a retirement plan. In fact, I would say they will break your retirement plan if you're not prepared. So
correct.
In the spirit of good planning, and and good podcasting too, we'll talk about what you might do ahead of time to help keep those things from derailing everything. So these are the 3 what ifs. Rick, so let's start with this first one, because this is where the bucket strategy, I think, comes in pretty quickly. What if somebody retires and the market turns ugly right away? Now, talk first about what happens if your plan had not counted on that happening and instead required that the markets go up every year for the first 5 years or so of retirement.
Well, and this also goes back to something I said earlier. This is what happens if you plan on averages. On average, the stock market goes up X amount per year. On average, a balanced portfolio achieves a 8%, 7%, whatever it is, average return. So if I get 7, and years ago, a very, very famous money manager wrote part of this into a book that said, well, the stock market average is 10%. So if I take out 6% a year, that leaves me 4% a year for inflation adjustment going forward. I'll be fine. Well, that's all well and good if average was also the every year return, and it didn't break from that at all. The problem is it doesn't do 10% every year. Sometimes it does 20%. We've seen that a couple times in the last 4 or 5 years. Sometimes it does minus 20%. We've seen that at times too. The problem is if you're taking a distribution during those not so good times, you can't rely on average then, because you're taking a big bite out of the pie when you're taking money out when the markets are down, and you can't achieve that same average. Those averages are for buy and hold. And over time, those averages are probably going to be fairly realistic. But they work very differently when you change what's going on, because average is based on time, not based on distributions. Distributions screw up everything when it comes to average. And so we have to have a plan that is bigger than the market, that does not rely on average rates of return or better than average rates of return or rosy pictures. It relies on reality. And the reality is I have no control over what the market's going to do in the next 4, 5, 8, 10 years. You, John Dean, as powerful and wonderful as you are behind that curtain, do not have any power over the markets. Nobody listening to this, nobody who even possibly could listen to this, that should be listening to it, has the ability to predict, control, or manipulate, or make sure that the market does what they want to do over the next 5 to 10 years. And those next 5 to 10 years are very, very important when it comes to distribution planning. You have to expect that at some point in the next 4 to 5, 10 years, you're going to have at least one, if not more, bad years. But it doesn't even take a bad year. It can be maybe you have a positive year, but you're taking money out during the year when it's a bad year. Remember 2020? We started at X, I'll just call it X. We went down by like over 20% by the middle of April or May.
Yep.
And even if you didn't sell, if you were selling off pieces of the portfolio to pay for the needs that you needed, you had to sell a lot more goods and assets to be able to get that same cash flow that you needed. That cash flow was never there to recover. But the 2020 was a positive year if you were a buy and hold investor. So you can't have a distribution system that will work in a volatile environment. If you're taking money from a volatile environment, you're asking for trouble. Now, it may work very well. I'm not saying that it can't work. I'm just saying that it won't work all the time. Mm-hmm. And that's the rub. That's the problem.
And that very scenario was one of the reasons why I think we started the bucket strategy all those years ago. And developed it, was because people would say, "Well, this is great, but what if we've come many times? We've seen them. First 5, 10 years of the markets. I mean, go back." There was a study that we saw. Was it Hancock? 1969. If you retired, there were some pretty bad years back then.
Hancock did the study back around 2008 or 2010, 2000, somewhere in that time, maybe after the Great Reset, and they said timing matters, and when you retire has a big impact on whether or not your strategy, systematic withdrawal strategy, works. And so what they did was they ran some background and said, okay, let's take a person who retired in 1969, and they have $100,000, and they want to take a 5% withdrawal, not inflation indexed. So they're not going to. So that's more than the 4%, but 4% was inflation indexed. Either way, it's going to be the same problem. So they retired in 1969, taking $5,000 a year out of $100,000, and looked at what would happen if they used a 50-50 stock bond portfolio using the Barclays aggregate and the S&P 500, and they rebalanced every year. They compared that person who retired in 1969 to somebody who retired in 1979 with $100,000 and wanted $5,000 a year from their portfolio, using the exact same strategy. Well, I mean, will it work the same? Well, it all depends on what happens in that first 10 years of retirement. The person that retired in 1969 and took the 5% withdrawal, by year 20, they were out of money. They had no money left. They ran out about halfway through the 19th year. Zero, nada, zilch. So they got very little to look forward. Now they're living on Social Security alone. On the other hand, the person that retired in 1979, by the time 20 years rolled around, they had $590,000 left. That's a pretty good. What was the difference? The strategy was identical. The difference was in the first 10 years, there were 4 so-so to negative years. There was no minus 20s or anything like that, but there was 4 not good years in those first 10 years from that 1969 person. And the 1979 person had no bad years in the first 10 years. Now, what I found curious on this, though, is when I looked at what was happening with the person who retired in 1979, 20 years later, they had $590-some thousand in their portfolio, and now they're taking $5,000 a year out of the portfolio. That's less than what? That's less than 1%. Mm-hmm. So you would think, well, man, they must be gazillionaires. At the end of 30 years, guess what their portfolio was worth? $590,000. Taking a 1% distribution, they basically broke even after 10 years at that point. So, I mean, yeah, it still worked because they had plenty of money. But now I looked at that and said, this is kind of sketchy. Why would you want to set yourself up for the potential of failure by using something that is potentially volatile, isn't guaranteed to be negatively volatile? I mean, it's going to guarantee to be volatile, but we only care about negative volatility. We like the positive volatility. That's what the second person got from 1979 to 1989. They got nothing but positives. It's that negative volatility that really sucks up the world there. What if we took half of that $100,000 that they started with? So we put $50,000 off to the side. We put it in our proverbial coffee can. It earned nothing. And we took $5,000 a year out of the proverbial coffee can. Now, that would last for 10 years, right? I put $50,000 in, $5,000 a year out. That my math says that's 10 years worth of distributions. It also means that I only have $50,000 invested in the market. Well, that can't be too good. That's more conservative. It didn't work before. How is it going to work now? The person that retired in 1969 who did this, 10 years later, they took $50,000 out of the portfolio again, put it in the coffee can, and took $5,000 a year out of the portfolio. By all rights, that is a much more conservative portfolio, right? Mm-hmm. What happened to their portfolio over that same 20-year period of time? Using the exact same portfolio that they were using before, but this time using it for only half of the portfolio, not taking distributions from that portfolio, taking distributions from the half we put in a safe environment. Now, at the end of 20 years, where the first person, when they used the entire portfolio, was out of money, the second person that was, by all looking, was more conservative, they still had $102,000. So they weren't ultra rich, but they still had money.
Well, and that points out the reason for doing that, Rick, which was that survival was the key in this case. You survive or you don't survive, and in that example, that's exactly what you did. So to cut to the chase on this would be to say that what's the solution for people who...
The solution is to not rely on the portfolio volatility to give you positive results all the time. Mm-hmm. In the short term being 5 to 10 years, don't rely on the market for your distribution. Do a buckets plan.
So if you
We've
can keep
about that before.
Oddly enough, we have. So the idea is to keep your cash flow, because that's generally in almost every case.
Don't let the market, who is not your friend, dictate your cash flow for the first 8 to 10 years of your retirement, because sometimes it'll work, sometimes it wouldn't. It doesn't work. Would you get on a plane and then when the pilot comes on and says, we've got a pretty good chance of landing this safely, but there's a chance we're going to crash and die. How many people would stay on that plane?
I think that was the they said, okay, it's an 80. You have like a 90% chance of it working.
We have a 10% chance of dying and a 90% chance of living through this flight. Who's going to stay on that flight?
Not going to happen. So that's why we do that. So we use that analogy a lot, and I think that's apropos.
Now, I will say that doing it more conservatively did have an impact on that person who retired in 1979. So after 30 years, when the person who retired in 1979 had $592,000 or something, the person who did the same strategy with the half of it in safety, took $50,000 every 10 years out, they only had $500,000 at the end of 30 years. So you did give up, your heirs gave up some money. But if you ask a retiree, would you rather, you have a choice. You can end up with zero or $500,000, or zero or maybe 600,000, or have 100,000 left over, but only on the other side only have 500,000 left over. I think that most retirees are going to say, you know what? I'll take the one where it leaves me with 100,000, and in the good times I only have 500,000 left over instead of 600. So
exactly.
That's the way we look at it.
Absolutely.
That's what we look at.
Well, and that's why we address those problems. Okay, so that's one. A bad market in the first 5 years of retirement. That's the first what if. So the second what if is one spouse in a marriage dies. Now this is if you're married, I mean you're both eventually going to go. But if you're married, certainly most of the time, vast majority amount of the time, one spouse does die. So this is not something that's totally unexpected, Rick. But
survivor issues are important because, like you said, it's rare that they both go at the same time. I mean, it does happen, car crashes, other things like that. But generally, there's a survivor for at least a number of years. And this can have a big impact on the overall plan from a funding standpoint and also from a tax standpoint, which screws up the funding. And so we look at survivor issues quite often, if not just to see whether or not it makes sense to do Roth conversions while you're both alive and have a better tax situation than the survivor does.
So what can happen? What just quickly, what could potentially happen if you're not prepared? You lose. Well,
you're going to lose some income. You are going to lose some income because you either have both of you have some Social Security, and thanks to the Social Security Fairness Act that passed a couple of years ago, both of you have Social Security, even if one of you never worked in a Social Security paying job before. Mm-hmm. So one of the Social Securities is going to go away. So you are going to lose income. But hey, there's only one of you now, so you don't need as much income anymore, right? Mm. But you also are going to pay more taxes for that lower income. So you just got hit twice. You got a lower income and you got more expenses because the taxes went up and the income went down. And where it really hurts is where you have two people that were both wage earners, both equal-ish. Their Social Securities are about the same. Maybe they both have $30,000 a year of Social Security. So they've got $60,000 a year coming in from Social Security. That's pretty comfortable. And then one of them passes away, and let's say they take another $40,000 from their portfolio. They've got the proverbial $1 million. They're taking $40,000 a year from the portfolio. Everything's fine. They're living up to the 4% rule. They got 60 from social, 40. They got $100,000 a year. They're doing great in retirement in their minds. One of them dies. Now they've only got the survivor only has $70,000 of income. Well, it's probably the $30,000 discount probably is not all savings because that person's gone. We've lost a lot of income more than what our savings went down. But our expenses went up too. Our expenses probably went up $4,000 or $5,000. So where we used to have basically $100,000, now we've got the equivalent of, $65,000. Mm-hmm. And it's a different game. And now you've got to live on that number. And depending upon how far into retirement this happens. Now, if this happens when they're both 97, not worried, unfortunately, too much, don't have 30 years left to fund. But if it happens early on in retirement where the survivor has a expected fairly long time, now we got to take a much higher distribution from that portfolio, which becomes sometimes unsustainable.
So that's what happens if you're not prepared. Now talk about how you would prepare somebody for that eventuality, even if they think everybody's going to live to be 97.
Well, we have to make hard choices when we're doing this. We say, okay, what would happen if somebody passed away? And is this a reasonable distribution while you're both alive? How do we make it more efficient? Maybe we do the Roth conversions so that we don't have as big of a tax hit in retirement. Do we have some life insurance that they have that we can keep and make sure to refill the portfolio? Is there something? What are the plans? And so we want to talk about these plans before the what hits the fan. We want to if something happens, are you going to live in this house? You're going to stay in this house. Some people, maybe they have real estate, and they say, now they get a step up in basis, and they want to sell the real estate now, but they got such big gains that they're not going to sell it. But once one of them passes away, they're like, I'm getting the heck out of this real estate. I don't want to manage it by myself. So we just have to start having this discussion to talk about it. And maybe we cut back on the distribution while we're both alive, so that we have more of a portfolio available when one of them passes away. And it's just a matter of discussion points. And it's very difficult to overcome that shortfall, though, without something like a life insurance. But at that retirement age, it's hard to get life insurance. So more of it's a discussion on what is going on so that the survivor, whether it be party A or party B, knows what to expect.
Yeah, and there's nothing you can do about somebody dying. There's nothing you can do. You said taxes go up. Just for people who may not know why, it has to do with going from a married bracket down to a single bracket, among other things, right?
Correct. And it's not the brackets themselves are the same brackets, 10, 12, 22, and so on. It's the amount of cash, amount of income that can be in that 10% bracket. Married couple, the first $20,000-ish of income they have is in the 10% bracket. Single person, first $10,000, give or take, is in it. So it's half. Same thing with the 12% bracket. Married couple, the next $90-some thousand, the next $80-some thousand is in the 12% bracket. For a single person, only the next 40 is in the 12% bracket. We hit that 28% bracket, 22% bracket much quicker. And so you're paying a lot more in taxes on less of an income.
All right, so to nutshell this particular what if, what do you do? You talk about things that will happen if somebody dies, but just very quickly.
You start making plans. And what I'm talking about is if you were looking to take a 5% distribution while you're both alive, maybe you take a 4% distribution while you're both alive, leaving that other 1% to help grow, to help offset the portfolio down the line, so that we have a bigger portfolio than we would otherwise. It's give and take.
Yeah,
it's planning ahead of time with whatever tools may or may not be available.
Yeah, and that especially the loss of the Social Security, I think, takes a lot of people by surprise.
Or it could be the loss of a pension.
Or pension, that's true.
Because not everybody chooses the joint and survivor 100% option on their pension. They may go from, maybe the pension was $2,000 a month, but now they're only going to get $1,000 a month because they took a 50% option.
Or they said, I want life only because I expect my spouse to live a lot longer than me, and I want them to have
that spouse passed.
Yeah. Oh man. All right. So a spouse dying. That's the second one. First one was a bad market in the first 5 years of retirement. The second, what if, was that one spouse dies. Third one here, in the time that we have left in this episode, is a long-term care need shows up. I would think that this one is fairly easy to solve using long-term care insurance. Is that kind of the way to go?
Well, that's one of the ways to go. And just you can set your portfolio up ways so that you may be able to get on Medicaid easier, but I'm not sure that people want to plan for that. Your only options there are, again, going back to spending less and building up more of a portfolio, or buying some long-term care. Now, if with the newer types of policies that we have, the linked benefit policies, the annuity ones, where you put in $100,000, you get $300,000, or you put in X amount of dollars, you get 3 times that much for long-term care. You can carve off a piece of the portfolio and say, well, this is going to be for my long-term care. I'm just using the $100,000 for easy math. I'm carving off $100,000 of my $1 million portfolio and putting it into this. If I need long-term care, or if my spouse needs long-term care, we have $300,000 of coverage, because we get a 3 times bump, or 2 times. You get 3 times as much. Now, on the other side, if I live to be 95 and I haven't needed long-term care yet, and it doesn't look like I'm going to need long-term care, I can still use that $100,000. It hasn't grown very much, but I still have the $100,000 to use if I need it at some point in the future. So it's a halfway there from big time insurance. But a lot of people are choosing to do that because it doesn't require future premiums. They can't increase my premium. They can't cut my coverage. It's going to be, I know what I'm getting. And that's been one of the problems with buying traditional long-term care insurance. People bought it, 10, 15 years ago with the expectation that their premium would stay fairly stable or not change at all. And their premiums have gone up 200%, 150%. And they usually go up, about the time that you might actually be needing it or just before the time you're like, and they offer you to change your policy. Well, you can keep your premium the same if you cut your benefit by 2/3 or you cut the time. It's like those are no fun decisions.
Yeah, and the premium goes up, but the benefit doesn't increase at all. So it's you're kind of not getting
or the
anything
benefit
out of goes
it. Down even. So
how often do you see? I included this particular one, long-term care need, as one of the three most common what ifs. How common do you see this issue come up with people that you deal with?
We see it enough to make us worry about it. It doesn't happen every time, but we see it enough to make Now, some people are able to self-insure. Not everybody, but some people are, because they, when the long-term care happens, especially married couple, when the long-term care can really devastate. You're talking about the death of a spouse. If you have a spouse that's in long-term care, the death of the spouse may be the least of the problems, because while they're in long-term care, the well spouse is killing themselves trying to take care of the unwell spouse, or whatever we want to call it. And then they use all the money they have, or a lot of the money they have, to care for the spouse in long-term care. And then they die. And now we don't have anywhere near as much portfolio because we spend it all taking care of them, and we lose the income and all the things we talked about earlier.
Yeah. And that's the scenario you get when you haven't thought ahead about this. And I understand that, some people look at the cost of long-term care, maybe a traditional policy, and say, well, oh man, I mean, where am I even going to get the money for this? So this is on a lot of people's minds, I think.
It really is on people's minds, especially people who have seen it happen to their relatives above them as far as generations. If they've seen their parents go through it, their in-laws go through it, their grandparents, they're much more likely to consider it in their world. On the other hand, if you haven't seen it happen, obviously it can't happen then, and so you don't think about it. But it can happen to anybody, but more than not, more likely, if it's happened to somebody in your house, your lineage, it's an issue. I mean, it can happen to anybody.
Yeah,
and got to plan for it.
Yeah, and again, this is it. You think maybe, hey, we'll both live to be 93 or 95, and then we'll just go to bed one night, one of us, and the other one doesn't wake up or whatever, but it doesn't happen that way. More often than not, there's some one or both will need some sort of care.
So make sure you've got obviously good health insurance, cover that, and take a look at the long-term care issue. Now, some people will say, nobody in my family's ever had long-term care. We either live or we die. And there are certain family histories that, long-term care may or may not be an issue because the diseases or the issues are more life-threatening than morbidity.
But still, this goes back to the plan. If that's my plan, is to not, is to either die young or never need it, then that you have not planned for the plan to go according to plan.
At least consider what would happen if that happens to you.
Exactly. So that's one of the things that should be looked at. So really, before we run out of time here, the point of the discussion today is not that every retirement plan is necessarily fragile or that people have to sit around expecting disaster. But the point is that a good plan should be built with some of these very real possibilities in mind. We talked about bad market and early retirement. That's one of them. The death of a spouse, long-term care need. These are three that pop up a considerable amount of time. Now, there's certainly more than that, more potential roadblocks, but those three are common enough that they deserve a place in the conversation. And I think this is why structure matters so much with your plan. If you're taking income, you said this before, Rick, if you're taking income from volatile assets during a downturn, that can create a problem. If your plan only works while both spouses are alive and healthy and filing jointly, well, that may create a problem. If these long-term care expenses show up and there's no strategy for dealing with them, well, again, there's a problem. So survival is the key. You need to build a plan that has some resilience talking about a plan that's designed to, I guess, bend so that it potentially doesn't break, and that's
bend don't break. Yep.
Yeah, bend don't break, and that's where, I mean, nothing's guaranteed, of course, but this is what you strive for, and things like the bucket strategy. Talk about tax planning, survivor planning, insurance, income structure, estate coordination, all that stuff working together. So, look, if you'd like to talk through whether your own retirement plan can handle some of these stress tests, you can certainly give the folks at Lucia Capital Group a call. The advisors there, 800-644-1150. That's 800-644-1150, the number at Lucia Capital Group. Check us out online, too, at luciacap.com, LUCIACAP.com. While you're there, as I always try to remind you, take a look at the downloadable guides that we have available, bucket strategy guides, Social Security, estate planning, rollovers, retirement income planning, and maybe a few others. Topics that tie in directly to what we discuss on this podcast. You can download them and read them and get more information than we have time to give you here on this show, which is great. Make sure you subscribe, Managing Your Financial Future, on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Yeah, that's the one. So each new episode shows up automatically, and you don't miss what's coming up next. Hey, we're out of time. Appreciate you all being here. For Professor Rick Plum, certified financial planner professional and accredited wealth management advisor, I'm your podcast host, Johnny Dean. That's me. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk with you all again next week. The information provided should not be considered specific tax, legal, or investment advice and is not specific to any individual's personal circumstances. Each taxpayer should seek independent advice from a tax professional based on his or her individual circumstances. These materials are provided for general information and educational purposes based upon publicly available information from sources believed to be reliable. The information in these materials may change at any time and without notice, and its accuracy cannot be guaranteed. Examples cited are hypothetical, are for illustrative purposes only, are not guaranteed, and subject to potential federal and state law amendments. There's no guarantee that you will achieve the results discussed or illustrated. No stock investment strategy or risk management technique can guarantee return or eliminate risk in all market environments. Rebalancing a portfolio may cause investors to incur tax liabilities and slash or transaction costs and does not assure a profit or protect against a loss. IRA withdrawals will be taxed at ordinary income rates. Withdrawals prior to age 59.5 may also be subject to a 10% penalty tax. Traditional IRA account owners have considerations to make before performing a Roth IRA conversion. These primarily include income tax consequences on the converted amount in the year of conversion, withdrawal limitations from a Roth IRA, and income limitations for future contributions to a Roth IRA. In addition, if you are required to take a required minimum distribution, RMD, in the year you convert, you must do so before converting to a Roth IRA. Investments in real estate may be subject to a higher degree of market risk because of concentration in a specific industry, sector, or geographical sector. Stock investing includes risks including fluctuating prices and loss of principal. Bonds are subject to market and interest rate risk if sold prior to maturity. Bond values will decline as interest rates rise. Bonds are subject to availability, change in price, call features, and credit risk. Barclays Aggregate Bond Index is an index commonly used as a benchmark by both passive and active investors to measure portfolio performance relative to the U.S. dollar-denominated investment-grade fixed-rate taxable bond market. It is also an informational measure of broad market returns commonly applied to fixed income instruments. An investment may not be made directly in an index. The S&P 500 is a stock market index tracking the stock performance of 500 of the largest companies listed on stock exchanges in the United States. Indexes are unmanaged and cannot be invested in directly. The information provided is based on current laws, which are subject to change at any time. Lucia Capital Group is not affiliated with or endorsed by the Social Security Administration or any government agency. Social Security rules can be complex. For more information about Social Security benefits, visit the SSA website at ssa.gov or call 800-772-1213 to speak with an SSA representative. Long-term care coverage policies and provisions may not be available in all states. Approval may be subject to the terms and conditions of the insurance company. Insurance product guarantees are subject to the claims paying ability of the issuing insurance company and are subject to their terms and conditions. Annuities are long-term investment products designed for retirement purposes. Guarantees are based on the claims paying ability of the issuer subject to their terms and conditions. Early withdrawals may be subject to surrender penalties, and if taken prior to age 59.5 may be subject to an additional 10% federal tax. Annuities are not FDIC insured. Certain terms and conditions apply, so please read insurance company materials carefully. Rick Plum is a registered representative with and securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor and member FINRA SIPC. Insurance services offered through LPL Financial or its licensed affiliates. California Insurance License number 05-18721. LPLIA California Insurance License number 0B91442.